Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. You've reached the No Name Cinema Society, the film discussion show that dares to dig just a little bit deeper. And it is Monday, January 11th, 2021, episode 63.4. This is our sound off, our freeform segment, and the last in our 63rd set of episodes. Hi, everybody. My name is Jonathan Betzler. I'm one of your hosts here for this evening. I've got Bogey behind me here at my home in Los Angeles, and I'll be in LA maybe for the next episode, but at some point in the 64th set of his episodes, I'll be going back to New York for a little bit, and I'll be doing some shows from there. And yes, this is our sound off. It's our freeform segment, sort of a catch-all where we clean up stuff from previous episodes, or we discuss, various things going on in the movie industry. More conversational, more freeform. It's generally a lot of fun, at least for those of us that do it. And I've got two sound off versions to co-host with me tonight. First, ladies and gentlemen, he's a veteran now, 2 episodes. Episode 62.2, the indie spotlight we did in the film Krisha. And episode 63.3, the classic movie discussion we did in the film Seven just a few days ago. The Enigma's here with us, ladies and gentlemen. It's Max Fano.
Love the 63.2 or the 62.3. They're both great.
Also with us, ladies and gentlemen, is also a veteran of 2 episodes. First episode 61.1, the current feature Over the Moon. And just 1 week ago, the indie spotlight we did on it 45 years, episode 63.2. Devin's significantly younger lady friend, ladies and gentlemen, Kelly O'Malley is back.
Hello.
So here's the crew, ladies and gentlemen, for tonight's sound off. They have no idea what's going to happen, but they know they're in for a ride, and hopefully you guys listening to us on Spotify and iTunes instead of watching us on YouTube, you won't be too confused. First, ladies and gentlemen, I just want to share with you this our schedule, which has been our 63rd series of episodes, so you can go back and look at what you missed. It started on Wednesday, December 30th with our review of Wonder Woman 1984, and then continued on Monday, January 4th with Kelly and our Indie Spotlight 45 years. And then this past Thursday, January 7th, was our classic movie discussion 7 that Max was a part of. And tonight, of course, is the sound off, and there you see some of the things that we've got in store for you this evening. Now, it's a question of who is drinking what.
Once again, I'm drinking a Blue Moon in my farewell Yellow Brick Road Huggy.
Max, are you drinking with us?
So cool. I missed the memo, so I'll drink to that. This is
It wasn't really a memo. It's sort of like, fans of the show know that we drink, and so Kelly's a big fan, so she knows that we drink during the shows. So cheers to you, Kelly. Cheers. You don't get to cheers water, Max, so you're gonna be left out of this league. It's bad luck to cheers water, is my understanding. Okay.
This is the beginning of my drinking problem.
You got to do the airplane thing where you spill it all over yourself.
Yeah, true.
Kelly, did you get that airplane reference?
I've seen Airplane.
What about Airplane 2?
No, I'm not.
Not many people remember the sequel. It's actually very funny. So Kelly is a fan of the show. Do you know what we tend to do always at the beginning of each sound off?
Book review.
No, but it's a decent guess. Ladies and gentlemen, if we have time to fit it in, we always try and squeeze in this day in history. Tonight, ladies and gentlemen, is January 11th, of course, and on this day in 1942, and of course 1942 is one of the years we studied, on this day, Kuala Lumpur was conquered. Japanese forces conquered the capital city of Malaysia as part of their campaign in Asia. The invasion itself went quickly and didn't do much damage, but the Japanese still ruthlessly killed 5,000 Chinese citizens within weeks of the occupation. The Japanese army held Kuala Lumpur until August 1945, when the Japanese surrendered after the atom bombs were dropped. So Kuala Lumpur celebrated 75 years of independence in 2020. On this day in history in 1987, something that football fans would simply know as the Drive. One of the most famous games in NFL history happened 34 years ago today. The Cleveland Browns were beating the Denver Broncos 20-13 with 5 minutes to go in the AFC Championship game to earn the right to go to the Super Bowl. From their own 2-yard line, John Elway led the Broncos all 98 yards down the field where they tied the game with 37 seconds left and then would go on to win it in overtime. Of course, they got crushed in the Super Bowl by the New York Giants, but it still remains one of the legendary series in sports history, and I remember watching it when it happened. And on this day, ladies and gentlemen, January 11th, in No Name Cinema Society history, in 2018, we had episode 46.3. Devin joined us for our review of the 1967 classic Bonnie and Clyde. It was the final classic of our third season, and it inspired our top 5 in the following episode, The Sound Off, in which I counted down the top 5 films from 1967. It currently ranked as the 8th best performing show Devin's ever done in terms of views. Devin's best show remains last year's Indie Spotlight, Downloading Nancy, which is actually our 2nd best performing show of all time. And birthdays today, ladies and gentlemen. Today is the 50th birthday of one Mary J. Blige, born on this day in 1971. The multi-hyphenate was an Oscar nominated twice in 2017, both for Best Song and Best Supporting Actress for her work on the movie Mudbound. So guys, that's today, January 11th in history.
Love it. Have either of you ever been to Kuala Lumpur?
Not I. Have you, World Traveler Max?
Well, I was there in a rainstorm during the monsoon season. It was pretty wild.
Did you go for the monsoon season?
I went for the monsoon season, yeah. But it's a gorgeous part of the world.
Kelly, you thought this was before. Do you want to say what's coming up next?
Book review!
Very good. She knows what's coming up. It's time for the book review, and we do this every now and then. We review a book that's related to either the film industry or the show itself. Previously on other shows, we reviewed a book about the making of the film The Pride of the Yankees, and not too long ago, we did a review of Ginger Rogers' autobiography in episode 59.4. Both of those were connected to our 1942 in review. Tonight's book is related to our 1959 in review that we did just last year. And so I've got the book right here, y'all. It's basically called, conveniently enough, 1959, the year that everything changed. So when it came time for us to do a 1959 review, I did a little research, and I went out and found this book by author Fred Kaplan. And strangely enough, without any provocation from me, James Monahan, one of my partners and co-panelists for the 1959 in review, also bought the same book. Obviously, it's a helpful resource when preparing for that show. With that said, James was frustrated with the book because of its fragmentation. He said it was basically a glorified collection of Wikipedia articles on a series of events from 1959. I personally think that's an oversimplification. Now, I admit that so many segments made me want to make a movie about them. They whet my appetite to dig deeper on my own. It was perfectly suited to my purpose. So with that said, I found each individual section to be just enough without ever being too much. It offered more to me than just the facts of a Wikipedia page. It offered insight into the characters involved and was very thoroughly researched and well written. I will say that while the foreword makes the case that the events of 1959 were the real catalyst towards the seismic change that is normally attributed to the 1960s, I'm not sure it ever makes that case successfully. I think you could have a book about events from 1958 or 1957 or 1956 that you can make the same argument about. There were lots of things that led to the civil discourse and unrest of the 60s that had likely been decades in the making. With that said, that doesn't make me think less of the book. With the caveat that I might be swayed by how perfect it was for my needs, I would recommend this book highly, and I think the fragmented nature works for those that are too busy, in the sense that you can put it down and come back to it because each section is only 10 pages or so, and it's a resource in that way. With anything that's fragmented, you can have favorite sections of things. James, for example, loved all the segments on jazz musicians that the book covered, and there were quite a few. And I already knew a little bit about Miles Davis and John Coltrane, but didn't know nearly as much about Ornette Coleman, and found that section particularly fascinating. Another favorite segment involved the visit of a Soviet deputy premier to the U.S. in January of 1959. His name was Anastas Mikoyan, and he was slightly more liberal and progressive than his boss Khrushchev, and the U.S. laid out the red carpet for him. And it was very interesting to read about him trying to play the middleman during his tour of our country to ease tensions and lay the groundwork for Khrushchev's visit later in that same year. Or the segment on white author John Howard Griffin's surgery to change the pigment of his skin to make him seem black for his work on the book Black Like Me, where he toured the Deep South posing as a black man. It's a fascinating and relevant story, and I can't believe that's not talked about more today. Another segment very suited to what we were doing covered John Cassavetes' efforts to make the film Shadows, which is largely considered to be the first real independent film. He actually went on the radio and asked people to donate $5 each to raise money to make the film, and he did it successfully. They didn't call it this then, but it was the first real crowdfunding campaign. So many stories in this book like that helped James and I get in the 1959 mindset. Whether you're interested in the films of 1959 or not, I think it's a really interesting read. I almost wish every year would have a book like it that would be a good resource. And Kelly, you said that the 1959 review was the most fascinating 90 minutes you've ever experienced in your life, our show. Would finding out more about 1959 beyond just the films be interesting to you?
I think I was referring to the 1988.
That was a good one too.
So, but I love history, and one of the things that I love about when you just take a year and seeing kind of how it reflects the culture as a whole.
The book sort of informed our viewership of the movies. Like, it gave it some context to, the things that were going on.
Right, because everything's made within a context. Like, there's all these socio-political, cultural, historical things. Nothing's like in a time capsule. So I'm sure I would love that book and be interested.
Especially if you don't have to, finish it in one sitting or anything like that. I mean, like, that's
the other thing I loved about what you were saying. Like, I love something with short chapters. I can choose how long I want to read it.
You were joking about 1988, but I mean, like, you did, although you didn't watch as many films as Devin did, you were sort of a de facto part of our 1988 review. Because you watched a number of those films with not just Devin, but sometimes with all three of us. We all watched them together. And I think you experienced some of what we experienced, in the sense that once you watch all these films in a small period like that, it changes the audience ship to some degree. Like, not just the information from the book, but just watching the same films from the same period. You see them through a different prism, I think, understanding the period and the styles a little bit more.
Yeah, I think I watched between 25 and 30.
Wow, and Devin watched 40. Your favorite was the same as our favorite, as I believe, right?
Yes, it was. Yeah, it was really fascinating because you see these like common threads throughout. I would be interested if you then did another one that was just within a year, and see how much they share and how they differ.
Before we did 1988, 5 years ago, we did the 1990 in review. So, I mean, I know Devin wasn't a part of that. It's interesting to me, even though they're 2 years apart, my experience is the films feel so different in looking at the films from 1988 and the films from 1990. But that's a discussion maybe for a different day. Max, do you have any comments? Any of those little stories I told from 1959 interesting?
Yeah, I think they're all quite interesting, actually. Interesting as well, the crowdfunding that wasn't called crowdfunding.
A fascinating story.
Right.
John Cassavetes was sort of a bold, no-nonsense kind of guy. He was teaching improv classes on the Lower East Side or something like that. And
well, he was acting, right? He was a fairly well-known actor.
He was an actor in Hollywood, but he was like sick of the Hollywood BS. He thought most of the scripts he was getting was nonsense. Have you ever seen the film Shadows, the one he made?
I'm not sure I've ever seen Shadows. I've seen a couple of his films.
It's about a biracial love story, something that you wouldn't expect to see in Hollywood for sure. It's supposedly completely improvised. Super title at the beginning of the movie, it says this is completely improvised. Like, knowing improv the way that we do, you kind of know that it was like not that improvised. You know what I mean?
Right.
Hey, this is basically the scene, and work within these very strict parameters, knowing John Cassavetes too, the way that I do.
Was one of the characters a jazz musician?
Yeah.
Okay, I think it's been a while, but I think I have seen that.
Kelly, any on John Cassavetes? You ready to move on?
Let's move on.
Woo! The lady wants to move on, Max. So that's what we're going to do.
Following suit right here.
Yeah, you're not wearing a suit. Whenever I'm around Max, he makes me want to pun. I don't know what it is. Next up, ladies and gentlemen, is time to open the obscure movie vault.
Yes!
Boom! Max is going to get in on this with me. This is where we look back at one of the lesser known films from one of the years that we've studied. And at this point, we've studied 1942, 1959, 1966, 1988, and 1990. This year on Obscure Movie Vaults, I've decided to focus on 1990 since those films are now celebrating their 30th anniversaries, even though we studied them for their 25th anniversaries. Usually when we do this, I have all these index cards. And so what I make people do is, I make people on the show choose a number, and whatever film is on the back of that card is the film that I review. However, Max wanted to get in on this. He's like, I'll review the movie with you. I'll watch the movie too. So I asked him over email to pick a number. I've got 17 of these bad boys, 1 through 17. So I asked him to pick a number between 1 and 17 over email, and he picked number I'm glad he
Same.
remembered. Otherwise, it would have been pretty embarrassing. He did pick number, I just realized that the audio listening audience has no idea that he
Right.
just held up 8 fingers.
Big number. You say the obscure movie was from 1990. Wasn't this from 95?
Nope, 1990. I hope you got the right movie.
Okay. King of New York from 1990.
I had to flip over the card to reveal to the audience. You just,
Oh my god.
Oh,
just
no.
spoiled it.
I
But yeah,
spoiled everything.
King of New York from 1990. Kelly, you're opting out. Is that correct for this one?
Yes, but is it based on the 1992 song "King of New York" from Newsies?
Well, I don't know how that would be possible if the film was from 1990. Now, a little bit of context before we get started. It's from director Abel Ferrara. And I've got some history with Abel Ferrara, not necessarily personally. First, as a freshman in college, literally days after moving to New York from the suburbs, I walked by the set of a movie, and being stupid and naive as I was, I asked a crew member what movie it was. And as it turns out, the person I was talking to was Abel Ferrara. And the movie set was his vampire film, The Addiction, with Lily Taylor. He very excitedly told me all about it, but he seemed very high and a little scary, especially to this kid brand new to the big city. I felt uncomfortable and walked away very quickly. I subsequently then heard him speak 2 or 3 different times at different film festivals over the years. And at one smaller one, he got very aggressive with his questioners. Not me, but he started to yell at one of them, "You don't make movies. You don't know. You don't know." My final Abel Ferrara story was I went to the New York Film Festival in October of 2007 to the premiere of his film, The Go-Go Tales. And getting into the New York Film Festival is kind of a big deal. He showed up to introduce the film, as one does, but he was as drunk as I've ever seen another human being, particularly in front of an audience of 500 paying customers at Lincoln Center. Poor Willem Dafoe, who stood by and was so embarrassed. As he slurred his way through his explanation of the film and the financing of the film, he stopped and suddenly asked, "Where's Grace Jones?" And then a deep voice yells from all the way in the back, "I'm here, baby." He yells back, "Grace!" And then the movie starts. He goes to the back of the audience and has a very loud conversation with the Grace Jones during the premiere of his own movie. So that's the character that we're dealing with here, guys. That's my Abel Ferrara experience. Anything on that before we get into the movie itself?
I'm speechless.
And our audio listening audience thanks you for at least acknowledging that.
That's why I said it. I should probably acknowledge that I have no words.
I love it, JB. Abel is my dad.
I did not know.
I don't have any personal experience with him. I did watch an interview that he gave, and he has this fantastic accent, right? New York?
Very New York-y kind of accent, yeah.
I think I kind of studied it for an audition, and it was really very helpful. It was specific, nuanced, and filled with life.
You should see him when he's drunk and angry.
And I'm wondering, like, is he okay?
He's alive. I don't know if he's okay. I mean, because it's funny because, like, his films, if you look at his films historically, a lot of them, like, are considered terrible. Like, The Go-Go Tales was terrible. You know, a lot of people consider Bad Lieutenant one of the best films of the 90s. It's a little rough for me, but there are some people that hold him in very high regard, and he's still, for the most part, able to find financing, mainly in Italy now. He's been mainly making films with American films with Italian money. That's my understanding. But so quick summary for The King of New York, which also debuted at the New York Film Festival, incidentally, in September of 1990, not 1995, Max. Just so we're clear. Quickly for our audience, basically the movie is about a drug kingpin played by Christopher Walken. Upon his release from prison, sets about to reclaim his title as the underworld king of New York. So that's my real brief summary, Max. Was this your first time seeing the film?
It was, thankfully. I'm laughing for those who can't see me.
I can hear your laughter.
You know,
what did you think?
The first few frames of the film were gorgeous, literally stunning. The walls of the prison, Christopher Walken sort of out of focus and in focus. And then all of a sudden, he would hang on things for a very long time. And I thought, oh, we're in for a doozy. In some ways, I was right. Definitely the tempo, the speed picked up after a while. It was not without its challenges. It had a lot going for it, I think. It was very stylistic in a way that I found interesting. And Christopher Walken, I could probably read the phone book. it was hard in many ways. How about you? What do you think?
I don't like the film at all. Like, it was moody, I guess, but never terribly interesting. And I agree about the stylistic point of view, because I feel like in this film, Ferrara comes off as a stylist, but not a storyteller. For me, the framing was sometimes interesting, but the lighting was often unmotivated and sometimes didn't match from shot to shot. That tells me he's prioritizing the look over the logic. There was some sloppy editing and even points where he reused shots to make it seem like they had more background actors than they actually did. Even on an indie budget, that's not a solution. Ferrara would have super tight close-ups with very long silences, but without context, it didn't have much impact. It's like having the burger without the bun. But I agree with you on Christopher Walken. I thought he was particularly strong. I thought most of the performances were over the top, actually, even the normally strong Lawrence Fishburne. But I do agree about Christopher Walken. I think he was an exception. And I actually think Victor Argo did a nice job with an underdeveloped character.
I'm a little surprised that I haven't seen him in more stuff after that.
He might have been on The Sopranos. I never watched The Sopranos. Kelly, did you watch The Sopranos?
I didn't, but I'm dying to know, did Christopher Walken dance?
No, he absolutely did. When he first meets his gang members, there's this protracted moment of pause. It doesn't make any sense. And it's supposed to kind of create tension between these gang members and him. And you're expecting them to come together because they're on the same team. And he's like staring at them. And then all of a sudden, they start to dance together.
Then I'm in. I'm going to watch this movie.
It's free on Amazon for what that's worth. Max has talked a little bit about the things that don't make sense. And that's my primary issue with the film is the screenplay itself. It seemed to play fast and loose with logic. Frank White, the Christopher Walken character, and his thugs weren't very careful when they break the law, but there doesn't seem to be many consequences. Often heads of crime organizations are hard to nail because they're so far removed from their crimes. But Walken commits murders from his own limo in broad daylight. And yet the cops are like, how do we nail this guy? He's untouchable. That's just one example of either a lack of thought put into the script or a casual disinterest in the details, probably the latter. Either way, it took me out of it, and it frustrated me to the point where I didn't care about anything or anyone in the film. I just wanted it to be over.
It felt very much like what you said, which was a filmmaker who wasn't very interested in details to the degree of storytelling. Maybe there were some details he was interested in.
There was visuals that he thought were cool and were interested in. So the stylization was there, but not necessarily point-to-point storytelling. Anything else on King of New York, Max?
Oh, boy. No.
Kelly, do you still want to see it?
Not really, I gotta be honest.
Even though we had the dance?
I thought about it, and I thought I could just watch a clip, especially if it's free.
Cool. All right, guys, let's close the obscure movie off for now and move on to the next segment, which I think is our final one of the evening. It's time for Top 5, JB's Top 5, and tonight it is the Top 5 Senior Citizens movies. Guys, in the old days of the show, Davey would assign me the Top 5 based on one of the films we were discussing in that set of episodes. Nowadays, in the days post-Davey, I email my sound-off co-hosts, in this case, Max and Kelly, and offer them top 5 options based on the other films discussed in that set of episodes and let them choose whatever top 5 they were most interested in. And of course, I was sending emails to the wrong Kelly, as it happens, but Max came back with senior citizens as a topic, senior citizen films as a topic, based on our Indie Spotlight discussion of the film 45 Years. So Max, my question to you is, what was the reason that you wanted to do a top 5 on this particular topic?
Because we both have about 10 minutes before we join the senior citizen demographic. And I find that people who have been through many, many years of their lives and are potentially at the end of their lives, there's something intrinsically compelling about watching them on screen, listening to their stories, learning from them, essentially. So I think it's one of the most interesting areas of character exploration there is.
I did set some parameters for the top 5, and so just for the audience's sake, but it's the primary parameter was not only did the characters need to be senior citizens in the film, but the film needed to deal directly with themes related to being of that age. That could be facing mortality, the weight of regret that came up in our discussion of Lucretia a month or so ago with Max, loneliness or deterioration of mental and physical health, or the economic realities of being a senior citizen. I'm sure there are many more, but those are just some examples. The example I gave in my email to these guys was that while Jack Nicholson was older in a film like As Good as It Gets, I'm not sure that film would qualify as something about being about a senior citizen, whereas About Schmidt something that came out just a few years after that would qualify because of what that film was about. I also want to clarify that I very carefully said that the characters need to be senior citizens. That doesn't necessarily mean that the actors need to be senior citizens. So those are my parameters. Now, the next thing before we start the list, Max and Kelly, you're just going to be playing along, right? You're not participating.
Yeah, like one just hit me, but I'm like, I have ideas, but I'll just comment, you know?
Well, I mean, I think maybe wait to the end and then you'll tell us what's missing.
I did not come up with a list, but like, I know that there are some that I know of that I feel.
You'll tell us when we're wrong. And of course, you watched one just the other night for us a week ago when we did 45 years that inspired this. So for me, Max, a couple of commonalities I noticed between these films outside of the senior citizen themes themselves. The biggest one was something that I hinted at during our review of 45 years with Kelly, and that was how strong the acting is in almost all the films that I watched. I watched a bunch in the last month in preparing for tonight, but also that I'd seen, prior to this, all the films that I was considering. More often than not, these films star experienced actors that have been perfecting their craft for 5 decades or more, and it shows in their work, not just in the 5 films on my list, but also in the dozens of films I considered. And the other thing that I suddenly realized is how many of the films I watched or considered were about British or European citizens. Very few of the films featured American senior citizens. And I'm not sure if that's just a coincidence or if there's something deeper there about how other countries and cultures value the older generation more. I'm not sure. I'm not making that statement. But it was telling to me that over the last month of reviewing these films, there wasn't as much American involvement.
I'll make that statement.
You agree with that?
Senior citizen tends to imply time and death, and in America, we don't do well with death. It used to be like people would wear black for a whole year of mourning, and in America, we get 2 days to a week off. We don't deal with death, so it makes sense. Like, why would we make many movies about it?
Max, did you notice those things or other things about the films that you thought about for this?
Yes. I mean, I agree with everything that's just been said. I think America discards our elderly, our senior citizens in a way that's really pretty astounding. I did notice there were several movies, though, that were American.
On the things that I was considering, I didn't have as many. And it didn't occur to me in advance. But when I was going over, when I had a short list made, I'm like, so many are British in particular, and I have a few foreign films that I was considering. Yeah. Guys, I think it's time to start with our list. Are you guys ready?
Boom.
All right, Max, you get to go first with your number 5.
Oh, my gosh. The Farewell.
Very, very recent one, 2019. It came up on the top 10 of 2019. It was Jim's number 4. I very much don't like The Farewell. Tell me more about it. Why'd you like it?
So I've got a couple that I think would beat it, but it's been too long since I've watched them.
Recency bias.
Definitely. Not only is it about aging and a family going through mourning, even while one of the members is still alive, it had a hearkening back to an older time of storytelling. It wasn't super fast-paced. It allowed the characters to develop in a way that I could learn about them without them just yapping at me. It had certain things that I thought were just beautiful storytelling.
As I said in the top 10 of this past year, I know the DP. I've worked with the DP of that particular film.
Oh, interesting.
And I like her as a person, but I actually don't like the way she lights, and very much not so in this film. I thought the lighting was flat in The Farewell. But also the performance at its center, which I know is highly acclaimed, but I actually think Awkwafina's terrible and not a three-dimensional character in this movie. I like the grandmother a lot. I thought she was terrific, and she won an Independent Spirit Award, I believe, as Best Supporting Actress. But the film won Best Picture as well. I did not think it was that honest, especially because of her performance. Awkwafina. I also found the storytelling style and the cutting kind of manipulative, overly sentimental. And so I like slow pace, as you'll find out over the course of this top 5, but I thought this film was poorly made, poorly acted. I like the concept. I like the idea. I like the grandmother. There's things that I liked about it, but there was too much that I didn't.
Feels good to be a hater, huh?
At least I'm consistent. This is pretty much what I said in the top 10 of 2019. But yeah, people hate me because I don't like The Farewell, but I wanted to like it, believe me, especially knowing somebody that worked on it. And I like her as a person. Kelly, you're mad at me?
No, I didn't see it. I didn't care to. Sorry.
Fair enough. Cool. No, don't. Fine by me. Most people are mad that I don't like The Farewell. I think that's part of it too, in the sense that because of its subject matter, like I'm somehow pre-required to like it, and I think there's just too many flaws in it, just from a structural storytelling point of view, and also just that one performance. I don't buy her as that character. Tonally, I just feel like too many of her moments she's playing like a comic and not necessarily like a three-dimensional person.
Wow, man. All right, that hurt. Go ahead.
Oh no, don't be hurt. It's not personal.
We
It's personal.
need tension so that people will continue to listen.
It's true. It's true. Nobody agrees with me about things. Kelly, I tell you how many times she watched these shows and she's yelled at the screen, apparently, when I gave my opinion on things.
I have conversations with JB that he's not aware of when I watch it.
Time for my number 5. I struggled with number 5 the most, going back and forth with 4 different films for this slot. But where I've landed, I've got a couple of foreign films to start off my list here. First to Sweden with Mr. Bergman and a movie from our 1959 in review. Ladies and gentlemen, I got Wild Strawberries.
Wild Strawberries!
Here is my number 5. He's yelling very excitedly. So yeah, Wild Strawberries is my number 5. It's a sweet and nostalgic look back at a man's life in a Dickensian sort of way. As is common with Bergman, in the film he explores existential questions, and as usual, he does so in a very on-the-nose kind of fashion. That's not a criticism per se. I just think you have to experience Bergman on his own terms. I really liked how the old man appeared as himself in the Reveries instead of a younger version of himself. I think that was very effective. To contradict my earlier point about performance, the old man in the film is okay, not as great as you might expect. He was more of a filmmaker than an actor, a teacher of Bergman, if memory serves. He seems to play one thing the whole movie, wistful regret and wonder. But that's also what the movie called for the most part. With that said, supporting performances from Ingrid Thulin and the great Bibi Andersson are much more fully realized. The film confronts issues with how modernity seems to inflict itself on tradition. I find it to be evocative and effective in that it forces you to confront your life and your own regrets. So guys, I've got Wild Strawberries. Max, you had an audible reaction.
Love it, man. It's been so long since I've seen that movie. I just felt like I couldn't really talk about it, but I'm so glad you chose that. Just stunning.
Yeah. Kelly.
I've never heard of it. I'm curious.
The constant existential discussions like that, so on the nose, can be a bit of a barrier, which is why some of these other films I ranked ahead of it. It's like a work of art that I appreciate, and that's why it made number 5 over some of these other films that I discounted, that maybe, Kelly yelled at me for not having on the list at the end, but its artfulness got it to number 5, but some of the more concrete storytelling in some of the other films, I think, put it above it, at least as far as this category is concerned. Kelly, should we move on?
Yes.
Max, you're number 4.
I'm going with About Schmidt.
Okay, tell me why.
Mainly because the woman who plays his wife, she does such a beautiful job portraying someone who just kind of lost. I mean, so does he. He does a great job, too. He's just so Nicholson that it's a little hard to get past that, even seeing him as old as he is in the movie. And then the quietness of the film, I really appreciated. His reflective moments, his achievements when he thinks about on retirement, he gets some sort of a watch or some pendant or something. And that seems to be a summation of a life, And so he decides to go on this trip. And I just thought it was actually startlingly beautiful.
Don't get too emotionally invested in my response, but About Schmidt is another film that I don't like. And to be fair, I don't like, strangely, and again, people don't understand this, I tend not to enjoy Alexander Payne's work in general.
Fair enough.
I haven't seen About Schmidt in a long time. I've avoided it. My complaints about it were similar to your complaints about Krisha to some degree, in that I found the film highly contrived and manipulative. I found the structure sort of, I can feel the screenwriter's hands, sometimes quirk for quirk's sake, and that's my general major issue with Payne over the years is I feel like sometimes the screenwriting is quirk for quirk's sake and not necessarily grounded. The letters to the child whose name I can't remember. It had a joke here too, but I actually just thought it was a cheap device. I felt the screenwriter's hand, to me, it was a little too constructed. And I could say the same thing about Nicholson's performance, even though it was nominated. I thought Kathy Bates was great.
I agree with everything you've just said. I happen to think that those contrivances exist in life. If you choose a cliche that is accurate to the situation, it becomes a little bit less of a cliche. But I agree.
When you can feel the screenwriter manipulating events to achieve a certain effect, whether it be comic or overly dramatic or whatever. I've been told that I'm particularly sensitive to that. I have a little buzzer that goes off in my head when that sort of stuff happens.
You do.
And so it went off a lot during About Schmidt for me. Kelly, About Schmidt?
I got it confused with As Good as It Gets.
Which are the two films that I gave as examples that top off.
Yeah, but I got them confused, and I didn't like As Good as It Gets because they're both Jack Nicholson, right? For a long time after that, I thought I hated About Schmidt, but it turns out I got the movies confused.
I'm secretly hoping that you still have them confused because I actually do like As Good as It Gets.
What's the one with Helen Hunt?
As Good as It Gets.
Oh my God, wait, I love As Good as It Gets. Oh my God, it's a different Jack Nicholson with Meryl Streep.
Jack Nicholson and Meryl Streep, that's heartburn.
Something's Gotta Give.
It's Diane Keaton, it's not Meryl Streep.
Yes. I got it confused with Something's Got to Give.
It's funny because Something's Gotta Give is the next film on my Netflix queue that didn't come in time. Spoiler, it will not make my list, Max. I'm sorry.
I wish I knew that before, man.
All right, you guys ready for my number 4?
Yes.
My number 4, ladies and gentlemen. This is a movie that we reviewed on the show already on an Indie Spotlight in episode 40.2, and it received a Best Picture and Best Actress Oscar nomination in 2012, and it won Best Foreign Language Film. Ladies and gentlemen, the Austrian-French co-production Amour. I recently watched another Michael Haneke film from 1990 as a possible obscure movie vault. And between this film, that film called The Seventh Continent, and Funny Games, one commonality in his films is how great the filmmaking is and how difficult his movies are to get through because they can be so dark and cynical. And Amour is no exception. It's a very difficult movie to watch, albeit in a very satisfying way. As I was preparing this, Kelly, I realized that a lot of the issues that I had with 45 Years, quibbles, because I like that film, but a lot of the little quibbles I have are things that Amour solved and did better. This is a very JB kind of character-driven movie. Very specific directorial choices that are artful and poignant, including long takes that allow the actors to move freely within the frame and therefore be more natural. The result is outstanding performances across the board. Ambiguous symbolism that is challenging, but also evocative without being forced. And so far, it sounds almost exactly like our review of 45 Years the other night. Super slow pace, but not as slow as 45 Years and not as lingering. It seemed a lot more controlled. So I appreciated the pace here. This film is much more hypnotic to me. Guys, has anybody seen Amour from 2012?
No.
Loved it.
You like that film, Max?
Loved it. For those listening audience, I was nodding my head. I loved it. Haneke's the mannequin.
Have you seen The Seventh Continent? It's so difficult to watch.
That's a movie I have not seen. I've seen The Piano Teacher and Funny Games.
Funny Games is not funny, Kelly, just so you know.
No.
That's misleading.
No.
Yeah. You could
Very
argue that. You're not too upset with my list so far.
Too upset. Brother. On point.
I like being on point. We'll see if that theme continues, because those are my more artsy ones that are on the list. Kelly, are you good for us to move on to number 3? All right.
Yes.
Max, you're number 3.
Woo! This one is interesting because I've been in love with this movie for most of my life, but it has been quite a while since I've seen it. So this could be a doozy because I'm choosing this as number 3, and I'm probably not going to be able to speak very well on it. But Harold and Maude, a brilliant sort of confluence of art movie and something that I would say is for everyone. The romance with death and the romance with life and the sort of beauty of seeing the light through the dark. I just thought it was absolutely fun and funny and beautiful.
For someone that hasn't seen it in such a long time, you described it beautifully. We did the top 5 counterculture films of all time, and Harold and Maude was my number 1.
Nice.
Without being about hippies, because a lot of people think that's what a counterculture film is,
Right.
I think it captured the spirit of that particular generation.
Absolutely.
Which is why I did not really consider it for this list, because it's so much about his journey to some degree. It won't appear on my list for that reason, not because of any lack of quality.
So you're just being a hater for hater's sake.
No, I love the film. It's Nick Danger's number 1 favorite film of all time. It's my ex-girlfriend's number 1 favorite film of all time. Jim Carroll's wife's number 1 favorite film of all time. It's a fabulous, fabulous film. You know, it is life-affirming, like you said. When thinking about senior citizen issues and themes, I didn't necessarily felt like it fit into that particular box.
Sure.
Kelly, have you seen Harold and Maude?
I have not.
That's a Kelly movie, I think. That's a movie that Kelly can get behind. I think Devin said it was top 5 for him.
He's walking through. He said top 15.
Well, I'm just wrong. For a movie to be top 15 all time for Devin, that says a lot, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Good film. I like it a lot. So, guys, time for my number 3. You guys good? Can I move on?
Yes, yes.
My number 3, guys, was a top 10 film for me in 2001 and an Oscar winner for Best Supporting Actor that year. The film I'm talking about, ladies and gentlemen, is Richard Eyre's film Iris from 2001, starring Judi Dench, Kate Winslet, and Jim Broadbent, all of which received Oscar nominations, and the latter deservedly won, though he probably should have been in the leading actor category, and Hugh Bonneville in that supporting actor slot. The film is about famous British author Iris Murdoch, whom admittedly I had been a fan of prior to seeing the film. During her later years, she suffers from Alzheimer's, and the film is about her struggle to deal with the debilitating ailment, and also how her husband John tries to cope with taking care of her while also emotionally preparing himself for her inevitable loss. At its heart, the film is a love story more powerful than any rom-com. Once again, the performances and scene work are next level. Dench and Broadbent create such vivid characterizations that give us a real sense of their relationship, warts and all. I've always been impressed with the way Richard Eyre structured the film, transitioning seamlessly between past and present in a way that coincides with the deterioration of Iris's memory. It's a film with maximum impact. As much as it was honored that particular year, I still feel like it's underrated. It's exquisite work to me all around. Guys, has anybody seen the film Iris?
No.
That's why it's underrated, because no one got a chance to watch it. But it won an Oscar, Best Supporting Actor of 2001. And it got 3 acting nominations that year. Kate Winslet's pretty well known, right, Kelly?
Kate Winslet, but also Judi Dench, Jim Broadbent.
Right. Well, I mean,
when you said that, my jaw dropped. I was like, why have I never heard of this? This sounds amazing.
Hugh Bonneville was like, this is before Downton Abbey, and he plays the young version of the Jim Broadbent character, and he's so good at channeling Jim Broadbent. Performances are just out of this world. It's a hard movie, Kelly. It has its heart-wrenching moments. I find it particularly effective and emotional, especially with dealing with a lot of these issues that Max and I are talking about. That means we can move straight along here, guys. Max, time for your number 2.
Yo, my number 2. So this is going to shock and amaze. Number 2 for me is Amour.
Oh, repeat! Yay!
Yeah. Haneke is, I think, one of the best directors the world has. I think he's not an easy director. I think he brings up things in a way that is his own gritting version of Abel Ferrara in terms of being a personality and choosing to ruffle people's feathers.
I like that comp a lot.
You know, I appreciate that desire to get out there and push against what people feel comfortable with. Haneke can do that in his storytelling, and that's what's so kind of like earth-shattering about his movies, I think.
We know Kelly hasn't seen Amour, so we can move right along. Max, yeah, do you have more in Amour? We both talked about it at this point.
No more and more.
No more and more. I gave him the opportunity to rhyme. My number 2 is the film that Devin immediately mentioned to me when I said we were doing a top 5 senior citizen films. Kelly, did he tell you what it was?
No.
So as soon as I said, Devin, hey, we're going to do this top 5 senior citizen movie, he texted me the name of a movie, and I'm like, that may or may not be on my list, and here it is. And it features another Oscar-winning performance, also in the Best Supporting Actor category, but this one from 1985, and it is the rare American senior citizen movie. Ladies and gentlemen, Ron Howard's Cocoon is my number 2. And this is a film I've enjoyed for many years, and once again features outstanding performances, some of whom from actors who weren't known as great actors during their heyday, but their longevity in the business allowed them to get better and better. And I'm referring to Don Amici, Wilford Brimley, and Gwen Verdon. They weren't considered actors. Gwen Verdon was mainly a dancer, an amazing dancer, but not really considered an actor. But they're all outstanding here, Amici winning an Oscar for his efforts. On the other hand, of course, Hume Cronin, Jessica Tandy, Maureen Stapleton were Actors Theater alums and were amazing from a much younger age. Ron Howard sometimes gets a bad rap because he is so deeply entrenched in the Hollywood system, and sometimes his films aren't taken as seriously. That might be fair in some cases. Some of his films lack nuance and subtlety, but this film is not among them. The film is emotional, captivating, and a meaningful exploration of the golden years. And it manages to be extremely entertaining in the process, which I don't necessarily see as a negative that some people do. Some have suggested that the film is a sloppy exploration of senior citizens in the sense that they are ultimately cheating nature, and what kind of message is that? The sequel, which is one of our films from our 1988 in review, kind of walks that back a bit, for better or worse. But I suggest that those critics miss the point. The characters in the movie take advantage of an opportunity that they are given, and why not? I don't think the message is about cheating nature as much as it is about enjoying life while we can. It's just that these people have arranged to enjoy it a little bit longer, that's all. I've got Cocoon. Kelly, you had an audible reaction this time.
Oh, I just suddenly had a memory of me telling Devin what the category was, and him keep saying like Cocoon. I was like, I don't know what. Okay.
You've never heard of Cocoon? Wow, it was early Ron Howard. I think only his third or fourth film, but it did very well. It has a sequel, obviously. I think it's very much a Kelly movie. It's lovely and exciting. I'm not sure it's a Max movie though.
You know, it's interesting. This was one of the movies I thought, I think JB might pick up on this, and it's a fascinating situation because I think it's a very good movie for all the reasons you've said. I also think that it falls into a kind of movie that I would call emotionally, what was the word that you used about Farewell?
Manipulative?
That's the word. Yes. This is manipulative, I think, in a different way because it has a big plot. It's really exciting. It's the fountain of youth. I could almost see a group of folks sitting around a table going, yes!
I could see a group of people sitting around a table being like, there's no way I'm green lighting a $40 million film with 6 old people in it. I'm surprised it got made. I've got 6 old people and Steve Guttenberg greenlight my movie. Like, I don't see it happen.
That's clear too. I'm sure it has its own hurdles. I just think in terms of storytelling, it's more manipulative by way of like a grandiosity, something that is just, Farewell deals with something that happens to everyone. They all get old and they all die. Cocoon deals with something that happens to no one. They get old and then they swim in a pool.
In doing so, it exposes fears about death, mortality, and also aging, but also within the threads of the film is a condemnation of the way that senior citizens are often treated, potentially in America or potentially globally.
Everything you're saying is true. I just don't think it holds up to the movies that you've mentioned so far, which deal with the reality of what's going on, which is aging has an end, and that's incredibly terrifying. I think this movie, as good and as fun as it is like going to a theme park.
This is why I thought it wouldn't be a Max movie. So I knew this was coming, and that's sort of in line with the I mentioned the critics that complained about maybe some bad messaging as far as this movie was concerned that I disagree with. So that's sort of along their criticism as well. For me, a film gains extra points if it's simultaneously entertaining and has depth. And I feel like Cocoon is an example of that. It deals with these issues with aging. I mean, I feel like there's more than one way to skin that cat. My own work is very much based in verisimilitude and honest exploration of real issues, but I don't necessarily knock something that takes a more fanciful approach. Sometimes a lot of science fiction opens the door to very significant truths about our everyday existence. I feel like this is potentially an example of that.
No argument there whatsoever.
And also, like, in fairness, like, it's a movie I grew up with, watching many times over the years. So it was one of the films that made me excited about filmmaking. So it has a special place in that regard. But I do think I don't want to say as an accomplished filmmaker, I don't know how accomplished I am, but as an avid film watcher and maybe a more mature film watcher, I guess I should say, I do think that there is a lot of skill in especially in the way Howard is able to balance the tone of, the science fiction, the drama, the comedy, as some of the more whimsical elements, all of that I think ties together in a satisfying way. And I think that's a lot of plates to spin. And I think he does it skillfully.
Yes. Well, really quick, I would say you're a very accomplished filmmaker. And I also think that my commentary on this movie is much more because of this, top 5 thing, because I actually think it's a pretty great movie.
Okay, cool. And so another one for Kelly to watch. Kelly, you haven't seen any of them yet, have you?
Yeah.
So we're going over, but now we're going to have our number 1. So this is going to be really exciting. Max, give it to me, baby.
Yo, so this movie is one of my favorite movies, actually, beyond sort of the genre of what we're talking about. It is an American movie, and it's a little unusual, I find, because it's by a director who is very well known for doing other things.
Oh, I know what it is. Can I guess?
Yeah, totally.
The Straight Story.
Oh, I was going to say that director usually does not do very straight stories.
I had a feeling this was going to be on the list.
Farnsworth, right?
Yeah, Richard Farnsworth.
Oh my God. He won an Oscar, right?
He was nominated. He did not win. Personally, I would have voted for Russell Crowe, but it was the year Kevin Spacey won for American Beauty. And David Lynch was nominated too for Best Director.
David Lynch's wife at the time brought this story about this guy who drives a tractor across, I don't know how many states, to visit his dying brother.
I would also drive a tractor across the country to hang out with Harry Dean Stanton.
Come on, baby. I mean, who wouldn't?
Kelly wouldn't.
But
I would not.
it's such a beautiful, it just gets under your skin. The acting is superb. Sissy Spacek has a important, not huge role. Farnsworth is just so freaking alive. That guy just breathes and you're like, what else, sir? May I take your order?
Max has apparently waited on him at some point.
I haven't, unfortunately, but just a beautiful, beautiful movie.
I would never have bet it would have been number one on your list. I would have bet More and More would have been number one. So The Straight Story is a film that I like. It didn't make my top 10 of 99. I liked it. I never really loved it. It's funny because Richard Farnsworth to me has a great lived-in face and approach, but I don't think he's ever, in any of his performances, really playing anyone other than a variation on himself, and not even that extensive a variation. You look at The Natural or Comes a Horseman, he's very similar from movie to movie, but more often than not, he's exactly what the movie requires. In all of those movies, his character, like, he's interesting, but I don't know. I never thought of him much as an actor. He's a former stuntman.
I was aware of his stuntman stuff. I haven't really seen many of his other movies. I think I saw The Natural, but it was like, I really don't remember it.
His other Oscar nomination is a film called Comes a Horseman, I think 78, I want to say. It's a good movie. It was fine. It was good. It didn't wow me or thrill me. And at points in the movie, and I've not watched it since seeing it in the theater, I wondered if it needed to be a movie. Like, it felt like more of like an interesting story that you tell at a Thanksgiving party or something. I don't know if it had the gravitas to be an actual movie. Not that it was a bad movie. It just felt not as impactful to me as it was to you, I guess.
I hear that in the words you're saying and the grimaces that you're making with your face for those who can't see.
They didn't feel like that major grimaces.
I'm just kidding, man.
I like it much more than like The Farewell and About Schmidt.
Yeah.
Kelly, I assume you've not seen The Straight Story.
Let's just assume I haven't seen anything, apparently.
It's fine. If you've seen other shows, Patrick hasn't seen anything ever, whenever a movie comes up. You're not alone.
I was just sitting here wondering if I'm going to get kicked out.
You're definitely not going to get kicked out. The whole point is, now we're talking about these movies, you pick one and you come back, we call it a second run, and then you can review one of the movies that we talk about. Max, you ready for my number one?
Yes, baby.
So at first glance, you might not consider this next film to be a senior citizen film, but the title very specifically refers to a man at the end of his life, even if he was 50 years old in the movie. And the lead characters, though in their 50s, they're in their 50s at a time when life expectancy was 45. So I think it qualifies. And sure enough, in real life, this lead character died at the age of 56. So this movie was very much at the end of his life. And given that our last top five on the show was a top five films written by William Goldman, it seems only fitting that my number one this month should be written by his brother, James. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm referring to 1968's masterpiece, The Lion in Winter. And if you think about it very specifically, that title is very much about Henry the Lion at the end of his life. This is a film we reviewed back on the show in episode 27.3 back in May 2016, so I won't go into as much detail as we did back then. But as far as this topic is concerned, obviously the title suggests the winner of his life, but the themes of the film directly deal with a man facing down his mortality and, more importantly, his legacy. And in this movie, it's as if his legacy was somehow a way for him to become immortal. They also deal with the regret of the past, whether it be the death of their eldest son, the affair with Rosamund, or the nightmarish de-evolution of their love and marriage into a constant, bitter competition. Henry and Eleanor are constantly grappling with what might have been had they made different choices, but neither is quite ready to shift to improve the future. The greed and pride of their respective characters are too great. Winning becomes more important. Yes, Peter O'Toole was only 30 when he played this man at the end of his life, but he does so amazingly and convincingly. Katharine Hepburn won the Oscar in a tie with Barbra Streisand, and in episode 29.4, I called this performance one of the top 5 best performances of all time. It is one of the best written and best acted films I've ever seen in my entire life. rich, smart, and amazingly cinematic for something that originated on stage. Cinema fans will also enjoy seeing a young Anthony Hopkins and Timothy Dalton in supporting roles. It currently sits at number 19 on my all-time list, which is pretty damn good. Has anybody seen The Lion in Winter? Max is giving a thumbs up, audience, it looks like.
Thumbs up. Amazing, brilliant, fantastic movie. Not something I would have put in this category at all.
It is about the winter of their lives, facing down literally about what happens after he dies. So it seemed really appropriate.
You make the rules, so who am I to say?
I don't think I'm breaking it. Given the context and the themes of the film seem very specifically to be about the things that we're talking about.
I would say your reasoning here blows the top off the category so that any movie dealing with impending death is a senior citizen film.
No, not necessarily.
I mean, that is a weird analogy to use, but maybe.
Yeah, but also, I mean, like, this is specifically about two people at the end of their lives. They're approaching these situations, particularly of legacy and who takes over the throne and things like that. They're approaching that as if they're going to die any time now.
Senior citizen to me means retired, means near the end of their life.
Which I applied to this movie, and I don't think I did it in a self-serving kind of a way. The thing that backs me up to me the most is the title itself is specifically referring to a man at the end of his life.
Right.
The movie is about like them coming together, knowing he will die soon, about who will take over when he does die. And in terms of retirement, somebody mentioned retirement. That's part of it too.
Okay.
You're not buying it, it sounds like. I mean, it makes so much sense to me.
Well, that doesn't change the fact that it's not about senior citizens.
But is your feeling that I defied my own parameters?
My feeling is just that you're just stretching the mold. That's all. I mean, there's that, that's great. I have to say, I think Lion in Winter is one of the greatest movies of all time.
Well, at least we're agreed there.
But I do think you're stretching your category.
I don't think so at all. When I imagine the category or the top 5, I was thinking about, yes, people facing end of life, the winter of one's life kind of issues.
Your very flexible definition of senior citizen.
No, I completely disagree. Like, I don't think it's that flexible. I actually don't understand your point of view at all. I think I've made a pretty compelling case here. I would argue that maybe your definition of senior citizen is awfully narrow and also very 20th, 21st century. And you've got a very narrow, specific definition of white-haired people that are doddering along streets. I don't think that is all that it is. I think that there is more to it. To me, it's about people that are facing mortality, and that's very specifically what this film is about.
I understand what you're saying. I just disagree.
I feel like the suggestion is I somehow cheated, that I made rules and then broke the rules, which I don't feel like I did at all. When I made the parameters, as it were, I never considered this out of bounds, so it didn't feel like a stretch to me. I take particular umbrage to the idea that I cheated. I'm pretty angry about that suggestion. That suggestion I find particularly offensive. I hear what you guys are saying, but I fundamentally, vehemently disagree. And that's my prerogative, and quite frankly, disagreement and debate are part of the fabric of this program. I don't mean to bring an abrupt end to the debate, but I am in charge of timing, and we do need to move on. Ultimately, I will say it comes down to interpretation. It seems that you guys interpreted this to be about films having a character of a certain age, and I interpreted it to be about films with themes related to being older and nearing the end of one's life. I personally didn't think a film like Harold and Maude qualified based on my interpretation, but I didn't think its inclusion on your list invalidated your list, Max, and consequently, I don't think my choice invalidates mine. I'm sorry that I've not been able to make my reasoning more clear, but I don't know how to make it any clearer, but I don't have time to continue trying. I don't want to make it seem like I'm trying to have the last word here, but we're running out of time, and I want to sum up. So I think we just need to agree, disagree, and move on so we can close things out. I'm sorry, guys. I feel confident about the choice, and I'm sorry you disagree.
I was just going to say, I think the fact, JB, that you feel so strongly about your point of view, there's probably other people who also feel the same. So it leads to an interesting thing to watch and listen to and decide for someone's self,
Let's hope. It'll be interesting. So in the comments, you guys can decide who, if you feel Lion in Winter qualifies. I've tried to make my point here, but it seems that not everybody is on board with it. It's time to close things out, guys. So closing thoughts. How do you guys feel about the evening, your first sound off? I know it got contentious at the end there.
It was so fun. I loved it.
You loved it even though you didn't see any of the movies?
Yeah, I learned a lot. I got to hear about some things I want to check out and some things I don't want to check out.
So, big question of the night. Number one movie you want to go and watch after listening to us tonight?
The Lion in Winter.
Well, I think I own it, so I can sterilize it and send it to you. Max, what did you think of tonight's show?
It was great, JB. Thank you for having me. I'm very eager to hear what people think of the show.
That's a call to action for the audience to make some comments. We don't know when we're going to be back, so stay tuned on Instagram to find out when we're going to start our 64 series episodes. It'll start with a current feature. The release schedule keeps changing, so I'm not going to predict it. So just stay tuned on Instagram, and we'll announce it when we're going to start up again with our next 64 set of episodes. That'll be about 3 or 4 weeks or so. So, guys, why don't you say goodbye to the audience?
Bye.
Yes. Thank
Great
you
to
very
see
much.
you,
And with that, ladies and gentlemen, this meeting of the No Name Cinema Society is thankfully adjourned.
Kelly.